Traditionally in the UK, a lot of people, it was a chartered accountancy background. What are your thoughts on that in 2025?
I think you might have been expecting me to say you don't need an accounting qualification because I don't have one.
Katie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, hello.
Could you just tell us who you are and what you do?
I'm a finance director at Google, and my team and I partner with Google's marketing organisation. We work across Europe, Middle East and Africa as the best part of around 600 people. I talk to my team a lot about this idea of a dolphin move. We all probably have preferences whether you operate at a detail level or a big picture, but actually if you're going to be successful you need to be able to dolphin up and down, and the hard bit is the switch.
AI and AI safety. I mean, you must be seeing some fascinating things.
One person on Team Isabella's figured out how to use AI to just automatically update all of her quarterly reporting decks. It's the kind of thing that would have taken 6 or 7 hours before. Creative marketing and amazing marketing, that emotional, that's what we'd call upper funnel, that's changing people's perception of a brand. Ultimately, at the end of the day, needs to have a purpose. Commercially.
There's a favourite quote of mine, I think it's a Tim Ferriss one: the success of their life could be measured by the amount of difficult conversations they're willing to have.
I love that.
Katie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, hello.
Thanks for coming in. As a starting point, could you just tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. I'm a finance director at Google. My team and I partner with Google's marketing organisation, and if you look under the hood, that's an organisation that does the marketing not just for one business, but about 10 different businesses. It's our consumer products like iPhones, it's marketing on the B2B side to advertisers, it's figuring out Google's broader reputation strategy. And my team partners with that marketing organisation to help them drive better ROI from all of the dollars that they spend.
Super. And give us a bit more context in terms of scale and how many people and how big is that organisation?
The marketing organisation, we work across Europe, Middle East and Africa. It's best part of around 600 people with pretty significant hundreds of millions of dollars of budget every year. And my team's around 15 people in Google. Yeah,
brilliant. And tell us, so you've had perhaps arguably an unorthodox route to becoming a finance director over the years. Can you tell us a bit more about the journey to getting there?
Yeah,
please?
Of course. There've been about 3 stages to my career. I started off my career as an economist. I worked in energy economics and regulatory economics. Super stimulating, and I loved it intellectually. But after a couple of years, I really wanted to be rolling up my sleeves and helping companies. And at that point, I made the change to Bain & Company, which is management consultancy, working on strategy. I was at Bain for about 7 years, working across a few different countries and very deliberately moved around different industries as well. I think that's one of the great things about consultancy. You get exposed to so many different industries. And at a certain point, I think like a lot of people in professional services, I wanted to then go and work for an actual company and see great strategies fully implemented and learn about the operational side. It was at that point that I moved to Google. That was back in 2014. And I joined an FP&A team at Google because it was a great way of both building on the strategic and analytical skill set I had from Bain and being able to build a much more operational part of my skill set as well, which you really get to do if you're in a function like finance.
I guess Google as well is one of those organizations, given its size and scale, where you really can spend a number of years moving around. Tell us a little bit about the sorts of the roles that you've done in your time so far at Google, leading to where you are now.
Yeah, I think you can both move around within the organization, and also if I take a step back, I've been at Google for 10 years now. It's changed enormously as a company and had very different phases. So if I slightly answer your question a different way, the very first period was when Google was expanding rapidly, growing at an enormous pace in all directions. And a lot of the job was partly around bringing focus and prioritization, and another part was fixing the plumbing and figuring out how to mature our processes and systems. And then in the next phase, it was Google is an incredibly enormous matrix organization. How do you continue to move at pace and be agile and operate and get things done fast and quickly and free up decisions. And in the current phase, you realize that's too much for simplification. It's a hybrid. There are parts of the business that are growing very fast, that are popping up brand new, need funding quickly, and other parts which are mature and need a much more refined and sensitive finance partnership. In terms of my roles, I started off with a heavy FP&A role. I was partnering our real estate business. You can imagine Google's got a pretty massive real estate footprint. And I was also running the corporate FP&A hub. I moved into marketing finance after that. In the first part, a big part of my job was actually on the regulatory policy side, figuring out and partnering on what Google's regulatory strategy should be, particularly relating to the European Commission. And the other strand to my work at Google is I've taken a lot of responsibilities on the climate and sustainability side, both in terms of how it combines with finance, for instance, looking into internal carbon pricing, and more broadly around how we can build and drive a sustainability strategy for EMEA.
Has that thread been something that's been really important to you in general? I know it's something that you've kind of grown, had more and more of an interest in. So just tell us a little bit about that.
I think sustainability and climate has always been very important to me internally. I didn't know how I could exhibit and try to move into that professionally until a few things happened in my personal life, and there were a few people who moved into my orbit working in this area, and I realized I could put up my hand and say, you know what, I really want to work in this area. I work in an organization, a company which encourages people to pick up 20% roles and stretch themselves sideways. And I realized I could actually lean into that and was well qualified for what people needed in the company.
Good. And it's something you enjoyed in that, spending your time in that role and in that space as well?
I've enormously enjoyed it. I've enjoyed being stretched both in terms of the content and jumping into understanding and being exposed to actually a pretty infinite space. I think 10 years ago, maybe sustainability seemed like a slightly narrow domain. And as the field has deepened dramatically, you realize there's a hell of a lot more to it. I've enjoyed learning an awful lot and being a lot more educated about things, whether it's around carbon or biodiversity or energy, and also stretching my skills sideways into other domains. There are core themes that are connected to my strategy background, my management consulting background, as well as finance. But there are other elements that have been new. I've enjoyed building and challenging myself on those sides, for instance, the public speaking side.
A lot of people we speak to, I guess, you hold Google up as one of the great tech companies and successes over recent years, and an employer of choice, but obviously notoriously probably hard to get a role there. What is it really like?
What's it really like? I think that one of the things that really struck me, particularly when I joined, is how fast-paced it is. And that at least was one of the things I was looking for coming from professional services going into a corporate. I wanted to be in an organization where things are moving fast and you have to be quick on your feet and having that stimulation of a lot of things going on at any one time. I think one of the other things that means is there's a lot of ambiguity, and some people absolutely thrive in it and love it. And for other people, that is their idea of a hellish working environment. And so if you think about the implication of that on a finance side, for example, one of the things we're talking about at the moment is Gemini, which is Google's version of ChatGPT. That's a new product. We are in the midst of figuring out what's the commercial model of that product. What is the marketing strategy? How do you think about defining ROI? And is moving fast all the time because the product's moving fast. It's changing names continuously for a start. There's a lot of uncertainty about the commercial model. And so for a finance professional as well, you need to be very comfortable with building it, what you need to believe scenarios, and framing that ambiguity to help people make clearer decisions. So I think that's one of the things I really love about it as well.
Yeah. And what are the common misconceptions about Google, do you think, from the average Joe?
I think one thing that Google has that's in common with probably everywhere, but you might not think about, is it's still a very relationship-driven organization. It's data-driven, but you can't only have a data-driven organization. And if I think about some of the changes that I've led and put through the organization, they would not have happened with data alone. It has also required a lot of understanding individuals' motivations, figuring out how to persuade them of a change, which is a combination of bringing data, but also really being very thoughtful about what's their agenda, how can you make this in their interest, who can influence them, for example. And I think that's probably one of the things that might surprise people the most from the outside. We're very, very relationship driven. And it's a very positive thing. Yep. There's a huge amount of loyalty and care for individuals.
I guess it's truly global as well, isn't it? So you're often working with people in the US. Is it culturally quite a norm for people to kind of just align themselves to US hours, or is everyone just very considerate that this is the overlap period, we'll do the meetings in the UK here and then we'll spend time in the US? I'm just interested to know.
Unfortunately, it's the hours are very Californian.
Okay.
I think it does vary a little bit from team to team, but my teams in the US generally start work at their 9:00, which is our 5:00. So that it does require quite a lot of work in the evenings. Actually, I've evolved so that suits me very well.
You become nocturnal.
No, not quite. What it means is I will leave the office at 5:30. I'll spend a few hours with my children and then I'll log on again at 8. Not every evening, but several evenings. And I'll get a lot of very quiet, productive time done with my colleagues. And I quite like that. It can work very well. It's harder actually then when you've oriented your day to map to California to then accommodate people in Singapore.
Yeah.
A lot of our audience will be CFOs, but also aspiring CFOs. And as we know, that role's evolved a lot in the last 5-10 years. And we've seen more different routes now to being a CFO. Traditionally in the UK, a lot of people, it was a chartered accountancy background going up through that route to being a CFO, which obviously not yours.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that in 2025?
Great question. I think you might have been expecting me to say you don't need an accounting qualification because I don't have one. I think it's a bit more subtle than that. I think it depends a lot on the business, actually. Yes. I think that you need to have a basic understanding of accounting, no matter how good you are at teasing out the clever questions. You need to know a bit about what's going under the surface to know where even to prod. I did my first level of the CMA qualification over the summer. That has taught me about a lot of interesting concepts I wasn't fully or had as much depth of, and I found it an incredibly valuable exercise. And I think for some businesses, perhaps those probably private equity backed, where there's a very complicated capital structure, it's very important to know that. And then there are other businesses where it's less critical. But a CFO does need to be able to understand and drill into those figures in that domain when they have to. I talk to my team a lot about this idea of a dolphin move, and I think it's a really important skill to master quite early on in your career, where we all probably have preferences, whether you operate at a detail level or a big picture. And I think everyone has a favorite place to be. But actually, if you're going to be successful, you need to be able to dolphin up and down between those levels. And the hard bit is the switch, the vertical bit.
Are you going to finish your CMA qualification? Now I have to ask. Now
yes,
you've started
I am. I will do.
Excellent. So you will be a chartered accountant, or an accountant at some point too.
Exactly. Oh. Management accountant. It's public record. I will get that qualification.
Excellent. What did you choose? I don't know. Obviously, a lot of people in the US, in particular, choose an MBA type route.
Yes.
There's different options. For you, is it more because you wanted the accounting rigor? You've kind of got the strategic M&A side already. Was that your thinking?
Yeah, I've already got that. I didn't do an MBA, but 7 years in management consultancy is the equivalent. Yep. And I really wanted to complement that with something that was more technical, and that felt to me like a really valuable way of getting that extra skill and adding that to the bow.
Yes.
And I guess it's a huge amount of the role, though, despite what we've just said, is leadership and people. Have there been pivotal moments in your career that have taught you things about leadership that have sort of stuck with you?
Yeah, I can talk you through a couple. I think if I characterize myself, some of the areas in which I spike are I have a great appetite to challenge the status quo and provoke big questions. I will also be quite clear on a particular mission or determined about getting to something. And I'm also quite impatient. Now, those three things can be brilliant qualities in combination, but you also need to be quite self-aware of that's part of your personality. And there was one project in particular where I really wanted to get into the heart of defining ROI for marketing and optimizing to that in a much more clear-cut way. And what I realized through that process was that by being quite so driven about it, I hadn't listened enough to people around me who were giving very good reasons why essentially it's not quite that simple. And I think as sort of one of the takeaways I've had from that is really about a much more collaborative leadership style and being a lot more nuanced. And I think it's a hard walk to take, because at the same time, I don't want to lose that appetite for challenge. And I don't want to lose that drive for speed and change. But at the same time, I would sort of summarize it as a lesson, which is go slow to go fast. Take more time to bring other people into your sphere and figure out how it can really, there can be something that's in their interest as well to drive change. And I think that was kind of that's been a lesson that I've picked up over the years and will continue to be picking up and refining as well. I think it's something I will always be cognizant of and aware of on different scales, whether it's at the sort of level of me as an individual or the entire organization that I'm working to lift and change and shape alongside other functions. And I think the same thing's true on different scales.
Yeah. And on a practical level, how does that manifest?
How it manifests. So, for instance, I'm working on something similar like that right now, where again I've got big things that I want to change and challenge, and it's a lot of conversation and partnering with people. It's and many people, and that's partly the nature of the organisation I'm in. Because we're a big matrix organisation, it's building the relationships with people, really understanding and listening and playing back what they've heard, understanding and asking a lot of questions on terms of what their agenda is and what are their constraints and what are the pressures on them, whether it's about their team constraint or what their team's been set off to do as a mission, which is a little bit different to mine, and understanding that in a much more nuanced way. And as out of that, it's not just about your idea getting more traction. It actually, of course, gets better as a result.
You enjoy people as well, though, don't you? I mean, I think we talked about this away from this podcast. You really get energized by people. Yeah,
massively. I love working with a team, having a team with me, having peers as part of my team as well.
Yeah, because I often think that particularly tech organizations, they kind of often have, sometimes it feels like they've gone away a little bit from that. You know, people can work remotely, programmers, all this sort of stuff. But actually at its core, it's still a people-driven organization, isn't it? Even beyond all of that great technology.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're in the office 3-4 days a week, and get so much out of being in the office, from sitting with people to discuss ideas, and ideas grow from being around each other. Hugely.
On the topic of that kind of technology and AI safety, I mean, you must be seeing some fascinating things in that space. You talk a little bit more about just AI for us and maybe how it shapes what happens maybe in your working day, like from the context of working in Google, a company that's pioneering AI. What does that kind of mean for you and the team on a day-to-day basis?
Well, with the caveat that this might sound quaint and old-fashioned in a week's time, I can tell you about a few things we're doing in my team. And I have to say that compared to this time last year, how we're using AI is very different to also what I imagined. I think if I think about AI, I think about it in two buckets. I think the first one is natural language processing. It's the wordy bits. It's your chatbots and the LLMs. And then the other bit, more quantified, it's about using machine learning to forecast and do analytics. And so I to simplify, put it into those two buckets. On the first, that's where we've had the most use cases in my team for instance, in the last couple of months. Just before Christmas, one guy on my team, Philip, he had a list of 200, 300 suppliers, and he asked Gemini to go and categorize them. And he did the prompt cleverly so that if Gemini couldn't find information, it didn't make stuff up. And that saved him a few hours. He also then shared what he'd done with our accounting team and with our procurement organization, because we could see how that could be useful to them. I got an email this week saying that basically this functionality is now built into Google Sheets. So what he did before Christmas may have already changed. But that was an example of something which saves time. And so then he can then go on, and he's got some slightly better data and do some analytics, but he's also got time freed up to go and do other tasks, more interesting tasks. We're also using it to drive more systemic change, but that's a longer way away. But that's where my head went when I first thought about AI. So some of the things we're looking at, there's a bit around repeated processes. So for instance, one person on team, Isabella's figured out how to use AI to just automatically update all of her quarterly reporting decks. She pulls in data from spreadsheets and it populates the slides beautifully. It's the kind of thing that would have taken 6 or 7 hours before every quarter. And that reduces errors as well. So that's really nice. We're working around, and we've been doing parts of this for a few years, but detection of risks. So how can we use AI to spot patterns that are correlated with risky behavior, whether it's fraud risk or to reduce forecast variance? And so those are the kind of things we're investigating at the moment as well, which can obviously has great benefits to finance, not just in terms of productivity and saving time, but also actually improving financial results as well. So there's a lot of ideas brewing, and we're on the cusp of seeing how it all comes together.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And I guess that's what you're doing in finance, and then I'm sure the teams that you support in marketing are using it in their way. And it's such a journey that we're going on. Do you I don't know, does Google have, and do you have kind of a vision for what finance will look like in the future, and what, I don't know, generally AI will do for an organization? You may not know all of the answers to these questions. I'm genuinely very interested.
I don't know the answer to all of these questions. I think that it's very clear that our roles are already different, and are already going to be different in a couple of years' time. We need to be a lot better at prompting for a start, but that may go away again as the tools get a bit better. The example I just gave you with Philip, he had to be pretty good at prompting to get what he did in December. If this is built into Google Sheets, then maybe you don't need to be very good at prompting come February. I think it could also change, however, more the skill profile of our teams more broadly, and maybe the shape of the teams a little bit. And I think that's still really interesting area to think about. And the same for my business partners in marketing, where AI is leading huge amounts of disruptions, both on the creative side and on the media side.
Yeah.
I think also it changes the tools and systems we can use. Last week I went to a pitch from a company called Pigment, who are basically an ERP. I hope I don't mischaracterize them. And they use a lot of AI. And I think there's also, of course, changes in terms of the systems that organizations can use.
That's fantastic.
And overall, though, are you optimistic for the future with AI embedded in it so much?
I am cautiously optimistic. I think that there are a lot of watch outs. The watch outs I have at the moment, before getting into a dystopian future, are a bit around skills, actually. maybe this is me being old-fashioned, but I think it's an amazing skill to be able to pithily summarize what's going on. And at the moment, I could put things into a doc or an email and that can get summarized for me. And I actually tell my team, it's fine to use that, of course, but you need to be developing that skill as well, because if someone stops you in the corridor and asks you what you're working on, you need to be able to give a quick summary. You can't say, oh, quickly, let me type it out and summarize it. So I think there's a bit around skills, actually, and being aware of what skills we drop and which skills we need to keep on. I have another watch out about clutter, which is a funny one. And maybe it doesn't matter. I was talking to someone at Bain, and they had this example where their client had a really arduous form to fill out, requiring lots of information. And so the client had started using AI to populate this form. And then whoever had written this form was using AI to extract the information out of the form for whatever they needed. And because now both companies are using AI on either side, the form's just getting longer and longer and more complex and gathering more and more clutter. If you had humans on either side, it would be a lot more streamlined and simple. And I can extrapolate from that example, or the example of how my Google Photos storage has got millions of photos when it doesn't need to, that we just create this mass of data, and there is a cost to that that doesn't need to be there.
That's fascinating, yeah. And I guess most people in the world are often fearful of kind of jobs, and as an economist, I'm sure you'll know this, people kind of think forward to that. Is that something that, again, you're optimistic about, that it's not necessarily about losing jobs, it's about maybe changing the skill set and the way we interact and the way we work? Is that?
Yes, I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. I can definitely see how AI enhances people's productivity. They still have a job, they become better at it. I also think that, honestly, it's a little bit too simplistic to say that's the be all and the end all. I think that might be a shape for some professions, but there will be other professions that could be much more severely disrupted, and I don't want to trivialize that either. I think that's important, and we do need to think about that.
I think hopefully from a sustainability perspective, something you're passionate about, though, it's a really big opportunity, isn't it, to help solve some of the big wider world issues that we have as well, hopefully.
Yeah, it is. I think AI can be helping both on terms of the side of mitigating the effects of climate change, for instance, figuring out how we can be using energy more efficiently, and then also in terms of adaptation as well, for instance, understanding how to forecast natural disasters more precisely and allowing people to, unfortunately, live with the consequences of climate change. Has less research put into it, but it's actually really essential, unfortunately. Yeah.
Outside, obviously, we talked a fair bit about AI there. Are there any other emerging trends that are particularly interesting or you're excited about?
I think as a topic, one of the things that has been a red thread through my career has been energy. And I get very excited whenever I think about the energy industry. I've worked on that. I started off in that area as an economist at Bain, and then within Google around our energy strategy. And I was talking to someone actually about this just yesterday. He's starting a business in this space. It's about figuring out how you can create behind the meter energy propositions. And I think why I'm excited about that is that we have, by and large, the technological solutions, but the gap is figuring out how to make these solutions commercially attractive or financially attractive to people, whether they are consumers or businesses, and easy to do. And I think that's a very tangible problem. It feels like there's a solution in our gift, but it could have huge transformative effects.
I think as well, everything I'm reading is that as we use more and more technology, we need data centers. They're hugely energy hungry, aren't they? Certainly at the moment. So I guess that's in your role at Google and thinking about that as well. But I'm presuming that's a big challenge to solve, not only for Google, but for the whole it's a world problem, I guess.
Yeah, it's absolutely fundamental. And how energy hungry AI has shown to be as being a big wake up call. It's and it is continuing at the moment to be growing exponentially. I hope that comes down, but that needs to be solved. And that's, again, why figuring out how we can transform and transition our energy system is absolutely fundamental.
And it's in the UK particularly, it's a big problem, right? We've got extremely expensive energy. There's a bit of doom and gloom out there about the UK in particular in terms of entrepreneurialism, etc. Is that something we need to really look at home here?
Entrepreneurialism more broadly, you mean, or energy?
The need for energy to help drive that forward, and the need for cheap energy, I guess.
I think there's kind of a couple of different things. I think in the UK, like quite a lot of markets on the energy side, we have a really constrained grid. And so then there's innovations that we need to figure out how can you get energy to businesses or to consumers whilst getting around the constraint of the grid. So I think that's sort of one area. And in doing so, then you can be, of course, bringing down costs as well.
From the people side, obviously you've got people that you interact with. I presume some of your team are in the US, or are they all in the UK?
The people who work for me are spread over Europe.
Okay. So it's probably still very relevant to this. How do you find managing remote teams, and how have you had to sort of adapt your style, your leadership style, from a time when maybe you had the team there in the office and you could get them together to actually now I've got to lead people that aren't directly in the same location? Has that adapted your style at all?
Yes, massively. Really good question. And you were asking earlier about sort of big pivot points in a career, and I think there was one I had actually in 2023 when I was stepping in to lead the global marketing finance team, who were mostly based in the US, but I was also looking after the teams in APAC as well as my own team in EMEA. And there were two things that were different there. It was one, people located remotely and operating in different cultures and there are different working norms, even if you're in the same company. And the other thing was actually scale. There's something very different about when you're 10, 15 people and you can all get in a room together. You all understand each other's sense of humor and context. You have a different level of psychological security. So how you make comments to one another is completely different to when, as a leader, you don't recognize everyone necessarily, or you recognize them, but you don't know their names, and you certainly don't know the names of their partners or personal things about them, and you're 2 stages removed. And how you have to come across is very different. And I had a real sort of change and a sort of awakening at that point, where I was in that situation, setting out goals for the year for this team. It was in the wake of Google's first wave of redundancies, so the rug had been pulled out from underneath people as well, and they had this new leader looking after them temporarily as a parental leave cover, and having to sort of figure out how to come across in a style that was different to what I was used to, with people I didn't know and from very different cultures, was really challenging and something I learned from a lot. And I didn't expect it to feel as different as it did. Having to very consciously modify my style and how I like to talk to people to be actually more cautious, to be a bit more, to be more careful in terms of what I did and didn't say. You can't take risks. You can't sort of joke in the same way, which is a lot of the personality and how I bring warmth to my team on a day-to-day level. And to anticipate and appreciate that for people in all of those different zones, particularly in that period around redundancies, they're all operating also on redundancies on different time frames, different sort of sentiment about what's going on, and holding all of that and being able to sort of bring people together to talk about what's important and still be empathetic. Really hard.
Fascinating. Yeah. Do you think it made you you almost took away some of the personality though from what you're saying? That's quite a hard thing to do. Did you find yourself becoming quite clinical? Is that the right word? I don't know. Just more kind of measured, precise, rather than the fun Katie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's challenging. It made me also appreciate why I've observed that in other leaders who are operating at scale as well. Yeah.
Because we often think, don't we, oh, yeah, that person's very corporate. Mm-hmm. And I guess in a global organization, that's exactly why they need to be that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you don't have to be completely clinical. I think you can and should still show vulnerability and a bit of how you are feeling, but that's different to perhaps showing a sense of humor.
Yeah. What other, you must have worked for some great people at Bain and Google. What leadership lessons have you taken from your mentors in the past that you sort of hold on to today?
One of the people I work for that I really loved working for is someone called Natasha, and I think that what I love the most about her is she's very clear what she stands for. It's very clear what her values are, what she will put up with, what she won't put up with. And people have a lot of chat about leadership values, and people can probably write them down or go through an exercise to sort of try and pull them out. But I think it's actually very rare where you find someone where they are so built in to everything that they say and do, and how powerful that is for the people who work around them, whether they're partnering teams or underneath them, because it sets a direction for what matters and what doesn't matter. So I think that's something that I've really taken away, and in her case, she's very clear. She creates psychological safety, but then if you do something that isn't up to scratch, you get the feedback immediately, but you know it's with your best interests at heart. And she, whether that's on a personal level or in terms of how to drive performance in the business. And that's an amazing mechanism to drive up standards and drive up how the business is performing, how a team's performing, how individuals are performing.
Have you now, I guess we can all evolve our values as human beings, right? It's one of the traits that makes us unique in many ways. But have you feel like you've now defined what your values are and how they kind of define your leadership style as well off the back of that experience?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. I think on the back of that experience, she has inspired me to pick up some of those values that I would have said were a little bit more subconscious, particularly around the piece around being clear and leaning into difficult conversations. I think that's something that I've seen how much I really value working for someone who has that, and I really pick that up and want to bring that consciously to how I operate.
Yeah, it's amazing.
There's a favourite quote of mine. I think it's a Tim Ferriss one where it's someone's success or the success of their life could be measured by the amount of difficult conversations they're willing to have.
I love that.
Which, that one's always stuck with me. And it's, but yeah, it is. It's something you're always having to work on, I think. Yep.
I think the point you made as well around, and where I think it's really important that it comes from is that place of, this is a difficult conversation, but it's difficult with the view that we're all trying to get better, not difficult for me just the sake of wanting to give you very harsh critique. It's always with the intention of improvement.
Yep.
And I think then that comes down to maybe the type of person that you probably need in the team, one that has that growth mindset and can actually absorb that.
Yeah.
Because I imagine that her style, your style, Neil's style, or whoever's leadership style, you have to have the right people to respond well to it. My assumption.
Yes, although if you fully subscribe to growth mindset, you might say that it's not about the people. There's nothing wrong with the people. It's about opening up their minds to be more growthy.
Okay.
So I don't know. I'd be a bit more optimistic than that, but I think you can develop people's openness to feedback. It takes a little bit of time, but you need to make them feel comfortable and that you have their back.
Excellent.
Do you think you can shift people from those with limited growth mindset to being fully fledged growth mindset?
I have been trying with my mum.
I think I have as well. Just throwing that one out there.
It's not worked there. Otherwise, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, it's one of our values actually. But we haven't talked about marketing much, and obviously that's a big part of what you do at Google. And obviously you've transformed that. Let's talk about return on investment in marketing and the intersection of finance and marketing, because I think in a lot of organisations it's an interesting dynamic that it was often a little bit fractious.
Yeah, it is. It is and it isn't. I think that marketers are a real combination of people who are very analytical and also very creative. And for some of the creative types, what gets them out of the bed in the morning is not how happy they make me, but how beautiful their campaigns are and how inspiring they are. And so I think at times that can feel in conflict. I don't think it needs to be. Mm-hmm. But again, I think this is probably a little bit of some of those leadership lessons I've appreciated over my years. Creative marketing and amazing marketing that is emotional, that's what we'd call upper funnel, that's changing people's perception of a brand, ultimately at the end of the day needs to have a purpose commercially. It doesn't need to translate into sales right now, but the idea of, say, looking at a car advert, or the same when we're advertising our Pixel phones, they're costing over $1,000, is that you are building a brand sentiment, and at a certain point it will translate and make people more likely to buy your phone or your car further down the line. So there is a way of putting a frame around it and building a case for an ROI. It goes back to that point I was saying around within finance, when you're in quite that ambiguous situation, we need to be able to figure out how to build what you need to believe models. You need to believe this, that, the other translates and comes down the funnel at this rate, and that's the kind of ROI we could get. And then you can build in more data sources where we've got measurement and there are characteristics that we know can maximize the success of those very creative campaigns.
Are there any sort of marketing initiatives that, when you're talking about that kind of return on investment, that just take years? They're not measured in our assumption is put out a great campaign, it will translate to sales relatively quickly, and so you can easily kind of go some ROI. Are there, in Google terms, kind of campaigns that you expect to last a very long period?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Marketing for dummies, by the way, for me.
No. This is a great question, and I love it because I don't often sort of think of things on this sort of big high level. I think there's a couple of things. One, which is, I suppose, about how much of an investment the product is. If you're spending $1,000 on a phone or even more on a car, and you only buy it every X years, then the marketing has to be lasting over a long time. So there's a bit on that, depending on the product, as opposed to if you're just trying to get someone to download an app, it's pretty instant, right? And there's a quick closed loop on particular digital product. We also market Google's brands. So I talked initially about how our marketing organization is effectively supporting, say, 10 different businesses, but there's also the Google business and interconnections between all those different product lines. And creating goodwill, sentiment, trust in the Google brand is another goal. And that's really hard to quantify. And sometimes the way you think about that is it mitigates risks. And that's then a bit more of a probabilistic framework.
I guess in your role then as well, because you are a finance person now with a strategy background, you must find yourself always being involved in those bigger picture strategic conversations with marketing, whereas maybe traditionally what we see as a finance business partner to a function, they're there to account for and challenge generally the cost base. But your role, I imagine, with your skill set is just so much more invested in the marketing organization.
Yes, I care about it. I think that that's one of the things I need to figure out, which is where can I differentially add value. So there's plenty of topics I might be curious in and have an opinion on. And I think that many years ago, that was also when we were a smaller organization without the luxury of having enough specialists. That was also the operating norm at Google as well. And I think as we have matured, it's a little bit more nuanced, which is, okay, where do we need Katie's opinion versus I have someone else's opinion on the strategy, but the fact that she gets the strategy means that in her core finance role, helping us understand and direct resources for maximum ROI means that we are doing it better. So it's a little bit about the maturity of the organization as well. Yeah.
Excellent. It's not often Neil looks blank with no questions, so that probably means we're relatively near the end.
I probably need some more coffee.
Oh dear, I haven't woken you up and enlivened you in the way I hoped.
It's definitely not. It's definitely not you. Is there anything advice that you would have for aspiring CFOs in 2025 that you think's important to know?
Now you've done it to Katie.
Now you've done it to me.
I think in terms of that, maybe just reframing it, it's kind of those things that people should be thinking about learning. You talked about a mentor that you had as well. Things that people should be taking throughout their career to kind of progress it in that direction towards CFO, if that's the route they want to be.
So I love that you talked a little bit about accounting, and that's an interesting complement to me and my background. I think for a lot of other people, they might be coming from that other background and trying to figure out, how do I build out that strategic skill set? And so I think that's quite often what I hear people wanting and trying to figure out, how can I develop that part of it? I think that, and so there's tactical things you can think about. I think it's whatever job you have, you can be thinking a bit about, why am I doing this and what's the purpose of it? And you don't need to be figuring out the company's AI strategy, or you can be applying a strategic brain to whatever you're doing. And I've found that very useful in my job, whether it's figuring out our tools agenda or our systems, or why are we doing it this way, or our locations and where we're allocating new headcount across. You can do that in a strategic way or not, which is about figuring out the why, thinking about it for more years out, thinking about how it reinforces the business's other solutions. So I think that would probably be my advice, which is no matter what job you have, and even if it seems like it's quite straightforward and mechanical, actually there's always other ways that you could be thinking about doing it to bring it up a level.
Yeah. No, it's going to be interesting. I was reading the other day again that this is certainly a US number, I don't know about the UK, but the amount of people applying to go on to accounting graduate schemes has gone through the floor in the times right now.
Too.
It's not as attractive as maybe some areas of technology or AI we've discussed, etc. So that's going to be interesting. So there's going to be a lot of there's less accountants. We've got AI affecting it. We've got we a lot of the US style investment banking route to CFO has come along. Consulting, also interesting to see what this means for consulting as well, because I keep reading this. I don't know if it's true or not. The thing on LinkedIn keeps popping up of I was sat next to a McKinsey partner on the plane, and they were just using ChatGPT to do a deck for X customer, and it's how much of that's going to be sort of affected by AI, accounting. Yeah, lots of interesting things there to see. Yeah, where are the CFOs of the future coming from?
Absolutely.
Katie's wondering why they weren't using Google's equivalent of ChatGPT, which we can't talk about that. Is it a sackable offence in Google to use Copilot on your...
Absolutely. It wouldn't even work.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Katie. It's been really good to have you on. Really appreciate your time. And thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.